February 6, 2014. Northern Norway. 5 Finnish friends arrive at the edge of one of the most feared caves on the planet. Their names are Kai Kankkonen, Patrick Gronqvist, Vesa Rantanen, Jari Huotarinen, and Jari Uusimäki. They're heading into Plura Cave, a flooded underground tunnel that's long, often brutally narrow, and eventually connects to a completely different exit, an opening called Steinugleflaget. This is the story of a dive beneath the earth that turned deadly. Welcome to the channel. Before we get into it, if you enjoy videos like this, a like and a subscribe genuinely helps the channel grow. Now, back to this nightmare of a cave. 2 of these 5, Kai and Patrick, had discovered years earlier that Plura connects underground to another cave system entirely. A few months before this dive, they'd already made the crossing once, in reverse entering through Steinugleflaget and coming out at Plura. This time, they brought 3 more friends along, planning to repeat the route backward, enter through Plura, exit through Steinugleflaget. Keep that name in mind. Plura truly is terrifying. In places it's agonizingly narrow, and in others the water reaches depths of 130 meters deep, enough to put immense strain on the body, though not as lethal as the open ocean at that same depth. But the real danger here isn't the pressure, it's the maze. On a map, the route looks simple. It eventually connects and comes out the other side. But that map hides just how disorienting the actual path is. Countless branching passages, most leading to dead ends, all in total darkness. One wrong turn, and you're in serious trouble. The 5 arrive with a van full of gear and split into 2 teams, one of 3 divers, one of 2. Why split up? In these tight underwater spaces, sediment stirred up from the water and cave walls, clouds, everything behind whoever's in front, like one car kicking up dust in front of another on a dirt road. So one group would go ahead and let the water settle before the second followed. Their target: cross from the first cave to the second within 5 hours. These weren't casual divers, either. Everyone had years of experience diving specifically inside caves. But even with all their skill and equipment, crossing these 2 caves remained extraordinarily dangerous, the kind of thing that demands people who are genuinely fearless, and more than a little hooked on adrenaline. That morning, the air was -3 degrees Celsius. Didn't matter to them cold, warm, it made no difference. Their plan was to enter through the flooded cave mouth, but by this point in winter it had frozen solid, so they'd brought a chainsaw to cut through the ice. The 3-person team began cutting, while the 2-person team walked back to their van for more equipment. What happened next between them isn't entirely clear, but the 2 who'd finished cutting didn't wait for the other 3. They went straight into the water, and the 2-person dive began. To move faster and conserve energy, these divers used underwater scooters, battery-powered propellers they held onto, which pulled them along. Their equipment wasn't standard scuba gear. Either it recycled, exhaled breath back into oxygen continuously, so running out of air wasn't really the danger here. The real danger was panic. Rapid, shallow breathing floods the body with carbon dioxide and can shut that recycling system down, and a diver can suffocate remarkably easily. Staying calm down there takes real composure. The lead pair, Patrick in front and Jari Huotarinen just behind him, moved forward for hours without incident, until they reached a stretch that was both narrow and disorienting. Patrick pressed on carefully until he noticed the light behind him had vanished. He turned back and saw Jari's headlamp swinging left and right, erratic, as if he were completely lost. Patrick turned around immediately, found one of Jari's tanks wedged against a rock, and freed it. But Jari was clearly disoriented, and with no radio, only hand signals and light to communicate, Patrick could do nothing but watch. Jari truly didn't know where he was. In that state, he reached up, pulled off his own mask, and water flooded into his lungs. Within seconds, he drowned, right in front of Patrick. Patrick was horrified, but his experience ran deeper than that moment of panic. He forced himself to stay composed and find a way back to the others. He'd spent a long stretch at extreme depth, and with nitrogen now built up heavily in his blood, he knew a sudden ascent could rupture blood vessels and kill him instantly. So he began rising, slowly and carefully. Meanwhile, the other 3 divers entered the cave, completely unaware of what had just happened. About an hour into their dive, they came upon their friend's body, and panic hit them immediately, not only from the grief of losing him, but because his body was now blocking their only way forward. The last of the 3, Jari Uusimäki, realized what had happened and fell apart. His breathing turned rapid and shallow, exactly the mistake you cannot make at that depth, and carbon dioxide flooded his system. He too died. Now Vesa and Kai were trapped in a narrow passage, one dead friend blocking the way ahead, another sealing off any retreat. Kai, the most experienced of the group, noticed Vesa was also badly shaken. Kai decided they had to turn back toward the entrance. After a painstaking struggle in that narrow space, he managed to turn around and start heading back. Patrick was heading toward the Stein-Ugle-Flage exit. Kai turned back toward Plura. Vesa, though, didn't follow. He pushed on instead, hoping to catch up with Patrick. With no way to communicate beyond hand signals, mistakes were common. Proper communication gear for an environment like this was extraordinarily expensive, so they'd simply relied on gestures instead. Hours later, Patrick finally reached the far side of the cave he'd had to ascend slowly because of the nitrogen in his system. Kai, heading back the other way, had to rise just as gradually. Around 1:30 in the morning, Kai reached the Plura entrance, the very spot where they'd cut through the ice. But the hole had frozen back over. Kai wasn't the type to give up. He began striking the ice, found its thinnest point, and broke through, emerging like someone surfacing from a frozen lake. The moment his feet touched solid ground, dread consumed him. He was certain everyone else had died, and he alone had survived. Exhausted and freezing, he stripped off his gear and ran for the van to get the heater going. Patrick and Vesa, meanwhile, had already come out the other side, since that opening hadn't frozen over. The moment they reached solid ground, they called the police, explaining that they'd gone into the cave, some had died, some were missing, but they themselves needed help. Rescue teams reached them right away and drove them to their van, where they saw a small light already on inside, meaning someone else had survived. None of them had thought to simply call each other, since each was certain the others were dead, and a phone is useless underwater anyway. Now came the grim task of recovering the two bodies. The survivors themselves were too shaken to attempt it, so they reached out to other experienced cave divers for help. No one agreed. Norwegian police said they couldn't force or hire anyone to risk their life for the recovery either, so the bodies had to remain there. Afterward, the government sealed off both cave entrances entirely. But Patrick couldn't let it go. He couldn't sleep at night, insisting he had to go back for his friends. 3 months later, once he'd recovered, he geared up again despite the ban, applied for special permission, and set out to finish what he felt he owed them. Another seasoned diver, Sami Pakarinen, heard about the plan and volunteered to join him. This time, without incident, the two of them reached the bodies, recovered both, and brought them out. Patrick finally found some peace, knowing he hadn't left his friends behind. There's a well-known saying among American cavers, and roughly translated, it goes, "The best part of caving or cave diving is that you don't have to do it." It's a simple line, but it carries real weight, meaning sometimes not doing it is the wiser choice. But adventurers hooked on that rush of adrenaline rarely listen to warnings like that. They put themselves in harm's way again and again, and sometimes it cost them everything.